So we need to get busy on that. And I have another thing, though, that I wanted to visit about, because you know, a lot of people are critical of what's happening right now in the Environmental Protection Agency. And I feel I've got to really talk about this because, first of all, I was chairman of the committee that had jurisdiction over the Environmental Protection Agency for about 8 years. And I see the things that are happening now and the improvements that are being made, one by a guy named Scott Pruitt. Scott Pruitt happens to be from Oklahoma. You know, he's doing things now, and I don't know of anyone who's ever been abused during a confirmation process like he was. Poor Scott sat there. As a general rule, after a committee gets through with that process, they have questions for the record. Normally, there's somewhere between 15 and 20 questions for the record. Do you know how many Scott Pruitt got? He got 675 questions for the record. But anyway, he's sustained that, and he's now doing great things. Over the last 8 years, I've had little, if any, chance to praise the work of the EPA, but I can sure do it now. After 8 years of being relentlessly targeted to shut out by the Obama administration, our farmers, ranchers, manufacturers, energy industries have an administration that will listen to them and work with them. And this is what jobs are all about. You know, a lot of talk about the visit that was made to our conference by President Trump yesterday. And he talked about, most of the time, was the jobs. And we're in the position to correct it. Now, what have we done to do that? The over-regulations, a lot of them have been eliminated. Now, there's a caricature of businesses as greedy, polluting, bogeymen, but in reality, businesses are run by people who want what is best for America, for their families, and for the stockholders. Now, like any sector of society, you're going to find a few bad actors, but we have laws and remedies in place to make sure that we go after those individuals. So the last administration treated those. They regulated as the enemy, not as a partner, in ensuring the environment is taken care of and leading to very harmful, unworkable regulations. All that's changing right now. President Trump is in his administration. The administration realized that working with those they regulate will produce better outcomes than only listening to those they wish to drive industry into the ground. Administrator Pruitt has been meeting with farmers and ranchers and energy producers and other industries to listen to and learn about how regulations affect them and how a worthwhile regulation might be implemented in a way that is producing unintended harm. I really can't see why this is a bad thing, as the goal of the EPA is not to put companies and farmers out of business. It's to put forward policies that protect the environment and don't have a heavy cost. But just meeting with those that have been shut out of the process in the past, the extremists on the left, seeing red, I guess they're just upset that they've lost their monopoly and their ability to write rules for the EPA. Well, Pruitt and the EPA are also moving forward to repeal the unlawful waters of the United States. This is one of the things, if you talk to the farmers throughout, not just Oklahoma, but throughout America, they'll say of all the rules and regulations, they're the most harmful. That's number one. That's what they say. In fact, Tom Buchanan is the head of the Farm Bureau in the state of Oklahoma, and he says, you know, that's the problem. People are not aware. In my state of Oklahoma, you get out in the western Oklahoma, it's dry out there. I mean, it's about as arid as any part of the United States. And yet, we know that if they move that jurisdiction of the water away from the states and to the federal government, as was proposed by a rule that was promulgated by the previous administration, that area in western Oklahoma would be considered a wetland before it's over. Excuse me. So anyway, that is probably singularly one of the best of the rules that have been changed. And by the way, if anyone wants to see the rules, A lot of people say that the president hasn't been doing anything. Most of these rules, they're up to 48 now, of rules and regulations that have been costing jobs, putting people out of business, and that have now been addressed by this administration, by the Trump administration, and very successfully. So right now we're in the process of getting some of these things done. The WOTUS rule, it's going to take a while to get that done because that's going to take some hearings and so forth. Another of the rules that is the EPA was working on repealing was the Clean Power Plan. Now, this is the thing that came from the Paris show. And I wish that people, in fact, I've done this before, talked about the history of these things that were put forth for 21 consecutive years now by the UN. And that is, they have these meetings. They get 196 countries together, and they try to see what can we do to get them to reduce CO2 emissions, when in fact they have not been able to do this. And besides that, if you stop and realize that 87% of the power that's developed to run the country our country are either fossil fuels or nuclear. Now, if you extract those, as they tried to do, how do you run the machine called America? But the answer is they can't. Anyway, as far as the Clean Power Plan, that was put together by President Obama, and it was something that you can talk about as long as you want to, about the fact that it was not good for the country. The rule is so unpopular that 27 states, 37 rural electric co-ops, and 3 labor unions challenged it in court. The cost of the rule is estimated to be $292 billion, but I've seen estimates well in excess of $400 billion. And the plan would raise electricity prices in 47 states. 40 of those states would see double-digit increases, and these increases would be shouldered by the American families, many who already have to choose between rent payments and their power bill, or choose between food on the table and their power bill. So the plan would also see the closure of 66 power plants and eliminate over 125,000 jobs in the coal industry, an industry that's already been struggling in recent years. The goal of this rule was to effectively end the use of coal-fired power plants, a cheap and bountiful energy. And what benefit would we get out of this? It should be more expensive energy. By the way, you know, the whole idea of the Paris thing was not just the Clean Power Plan put forth by our president, but it was also what other countries were forced to do. China, for example, their commitment to signing on to this deal that was in Paris, that everyone was so upset about, that they committed for the next 10 years to continue to increase every 10 days an additional coal-fired power plant. And then they would try to reduce them after that. Well, what kind of a deal is that? They look back at the United States and think they know what's going to happen to our manufacturing base. They're going to go to China if we had to do this thing. And besides that, the most ridiculous thing about this, the president's commitment under the Clean Power Plan was to reduce our CO2 emissions by somewhere between 26 and 28% by 2025. Now, the problem with that is it can't be done. And we even called in the EPA to tell us how this could be done, and they agreed that it could not be done. So anyway, that's something that is behind us now. And I commend Scott Pruitt for realizing the legal footing, this rule, and seeing that the cost the American people will bear under this rule is not going to happen. Just last week, the EPA announced that it will end its controversial policy known as sue and settle. Well, this is a good one. The policy that has cost the taxpayers an estimated $67 billion in new regulations stemming from this practice. And how this works is, under this, though some extremist group will come in and sue the EPA for not doing something, and so they come into a settlement agreement with the EPA, and the EPA is in concert with them to come up with the very thing that they were not able to get through legislatively. And it's called sue and settle. And you've heard the president talk about ending that practice, and it's one that needs to be ended, and it's going to. This practice circumvented the Administrative Procedures Act, usually ended up in settlements that were extremely beneficial to the extremist groups and got them exactly what they wanted all the time. So my state of Oklahoma was a victim of this practice. In 2011, the EPA used consent agreements stemming from court cases in other states, not in Oklahoma, but other states. And Oklahoma wasn't even a part of it or aware of it. They do that to overrule the state's regional haze plan to impose EPA's own costly plan on Oklahoma electricity ratepayers. Now, the plan that the EPA has pushed on this state cost an estimated $282 million each year. That's just to our state of Oklahoma, and something that we would have to pay for. Now, the regional haze problem has nothing to do with health. It's all visibility. So this was ruining the theme of the Oklahoma, of the Obama EPA. So never mind that regional haze is entirely a visibility issue and not a health issue. Never mind that Congress specifically gave states the authority to regulate regional haze under the Clean Air Act and the amendments that I strongly supported when they came through, because it's a visibility issue and not a health issue. But because an environmentalist group didn't like how Oklahoma was handling their own business, they sued the EPA in courts outside of Oklahoma, did not include Oklahoma as a party in the case, and the EPA capitulated and entered into an agreement with the some of the extremists that conveniently required the EPA to impose their own expensive plan on my state of Oklahoma. So I'm glad that Administrator Pruitt has announced an end to this policy, and I urge my colleagues to take up Senate Bill 119. It's the Sunshine for Regulatory Decrees and Settlement Act, of which I am an original co-sponsor, to end this practice and end it across the government and can't be re-implemented by future administrations. Finally, I'd like to encourage the EPA to move ahead with a hinted pending directive that would restrict scientists who receive EPA grants from serving on the agency's Scientific Advisory Committee. I've previously expressed concerns over the composition of the agency's advisory commissions for many reasons, including highlighting the fact that many science advisors under the Obama EPA, including the majority of those on the Clean Air Scientific Advisory Committee, that's called CASAC, they've received considerable financial support from the EPA. Well, they're calling into question their independence and overall integrity and of the advisors. So the National Academy of Sciences and the EPA's own peer-reviewed handbook state that grants can constitute a conflict or lack of impartiality. Well, we're not talking about small grants either. We're talking about millions of dollars in grants. CASAC, during last year of the Obama administration, had 6 of 7 members receiving, these 7 members of CASAC, keep in mind, the 6 of the 7 members received a total of $119 million in grants, in the EPA research grants, and 3 of the members received in excess of $25 million each. These are the scientists that are making the decisions. 22 of the 26 members of CASAC subcommittee on the particulate matter received more than $330 million in EPA grants. Well, the scientists that received vast sums of money from the very agency that they are advising certainly constitute a conflict of interest and at the minimum give an appearance of a lack of impartiality. As such, I welcome the news that Administrator Pruitt will be seeking to limit this worrisome practice. Mr. President, I've laid out only a few of the many great things that EPA is doing right now and what Administrator Pruitt is doing. You know, he was I got to know him a long time ago. In fact, I flew him around the state in my airplane back when he ran for the first statewide office. And he's a guy who's a tiger. He's doing the right thing, and I'm very proud of what they're doing. After this morning, the EPA is now advancing 5 EPA nominees for the EPA General Counsel and for the Offices of Enforcement of Air, Radiation, Water, and Chemical Safety. So each of these nominees are needed for the issues I've talked about. and for many others, they are on the agency's plate. Scott Pruitt has been working on so much of the president's agenda, the conservative agenda alone, and he needs help on these policies. So I call on my colleagues and the leadership to prioritize these nominations. You know, you can't get this stuff done unless you have help. You know, we've watched in the past, we've never seen a time when we've gotten into this far into an administration and have this large number of people who have not been confirmed.